I could have entitled this sermon, "What Should I Do When I Am Really Frightened?" Because last week, after the service, I received a most thoughtful, a most genuine piece of constructive feedback. But this is a really, really challenging time. And I, this person said, need help holding on to hope. And you spoke to hope, Alan, but I don't know if you really spoke to how many of us are really scared right now about the future. And this person said, until last year, I never felt this way. I mean, what's going on in this nation and world is so disturbing that this is the number one thing I need help with. I've struggled with being afraid, anger, anxiety, more often than I'd care to admit, such that I have to double down on my own spiritual practice. Because I'm capable, just like anyone else, of allowing fear, or hatred, deception to rise in me. You know, that type of self-deception that prevents me from being the person I am called to be. How about you? I mean, it all comes down to the amygdala. That's how scientists say it. They don't say amygdalas. Amygdala in our brains, that almond-shaped place where when we are feeling frightened, sends stress signals into our bodies, such that scientists say we either fight or flee. But you know what? There's a couple of other reactions as well. And I'm glad that someone said, or freeze, just now. Absolutely, that's what I often do, is freeze. And then there's a fourth one that we should be talking about, and that's fawn. A lot of people, when they get really nervous and frightened, I fawn. You know, how else could the president of our country get away with such egregious actions, policies, and positions than all sorts of people fawning? Because somehow, the president has this capacity to get into our amygdalas. Amygdalae, excuse me. My friends, I'm not trying to activate your amygdalae right now. No, I'm trying to own what I'm seeing and what causes me deep concern. And now I want to tell you how I have come to navigate my own amygdala signals. And that is learning from others who've navigated far more challenging circumstances than I have. It was in college and seminary that I learned how to be real within myself by witnessing how my gay and lesbian friends claimed their own identity unapologetically, including my fellow student who transitioned among us in seminary from a woman to a man. It was while working with abused children in residential treatment and as a chaplain on the AIDS oncology unit at San Francisco General that I witnessed how compassion and inner strength create space or even the most anxious souls can change or become vital. And it was from my missionary Baptist colleagues on the west side of Chicago that I've learned how to cultivate my own faith to navigate really scary circumstances. I'll never forget when Trump was first elected to his first term, how most everyone I knew were demoralized and in a panic. And Pastor Ira Ackery, who's often quoted by the New York Times, he said to me, "Alan, so many of you white liberals are soft. For us black people, nothing has really changed in our communities. They're on the west side." And through their actions, my missionary Baptist colleagues communicated, don't despair. Grow your faith. Connect to narratives of hope. Join with others who refuse to let fear get the better of them and act from that center within you that nothing can destroy. Now, what they were saying to me was what I encountered in the life and work of Howard Thurman. I'm curious, how many people here are familiar with any of the work of Howard Thurman? A few. Great. I'm excited that I get to introduce you to this extraordinary theologian. He's often called the mystic behind the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. And no other theologian, minister, has impacted my own theology more. He taught at Morehouse College and Howard University. He founded the first interracial church in San Francisco and then became the first black dean at an Ivy League school, serving as dean of the chapel at Boston University. Perhaps most significantly to history, he mentored Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. while he was at Boston University and stayed close to him after. He introduced King and other civil rights leaders to the work of Gandhi and his teachings of satyagraha, soul force, radical nonviolence, that we must, in responding to injustice, take on the suffering of the world rather than move forward with brute force. To allow others to recognize how brute force is not how we can move forward into the future. Now, in 1945, Thurman went to India. He was 35 years old, taking a bunch of students from Morehouse College, where he met Gandhi. But he also met a scholar who said to him, "Why do you support the religion of those who colonized your continent? How can you practice the religion of those who enslaved your grandparents? Are you not a traitor to your own people and all darker peoples?" Thurman meditated on this query. And in time, his response was this: "It's hard to call myself a Christian, given what has been done in the name of Christianity. But I can readily call myself a follower of Jesus. For Jesus served the vulnerable. Jesus ministered to those who had their backs up against the walls. Jesus had a message of love that included the keys to spiritual dignity that no one can ever take away. He taught that we are capable of living with the kind of love that casts out fear. Love that recognizes the humanity of all people so that hatred does not grow in us. Love that calls us to live transparently, vulnerably. For our spiritual power comes from allowing the voice of the genuine to flow through us. In fact, late in his life, when he was giving the commencement address to Spelman College, he said, "The sound of the genuine is flowing through you. Don't be deceived and thrown off by all the noises that are a part even of your dreams, your ambitions, so that you don't hear the sound of the genuine in you. Because the sound of the genuine is the only true guide that you will ever have. And if you don't have that, you don't have a thing." I just so happened to take a course on the work and life of Howard Thurman in my first semester of seminary at Starr King School by the minister who followed him at the Fellowship of All Peoples in San Francisco. I learned and read about his book called Deep River. It's an interpretation of the Negro, what he calls the Negro spirituals. And Thurman explores how spirituals sprung up from the deep pain and suffering inflicted by forced bondage, and how they have served and continue to serve as spiritual watering holes for generations of people who have known struggle and indignity. When Howard Thurman published this 1955 volume, he gave a copy to his doctoral student, Martin Luther King, a signed copy that said, "To Martin and Coretta King, the test of life is often found in the amount of pain we can absorb without spoiling our joy." The test of life is often found in the amount of pain we can absorb without spoiling our joy. And Thurman was the minister and theologians that civil rights leaders most frequently turned to refill their wells. Wherever Martin Luther King Jr. went, he always carried with him three things: his Bible, a copy of the United States Constitution, and a signed copy of Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited. Jesus and the Disinherited is a short, extraordinary work, and when I read it in seminary, I was changed. I grew up Unitarian Universalist and a secular humanist, and Jesus seemed utterly irrelevant to my life. But Thurman's short 1949 publication looked at Jesus as ministering to those who are truly vulnerable. He explores the rich spirituality that rose up from those who faced oppression. And Thurman's little book has only 4 chapters in addition to the introduction. And the first 3 chapters are entitled Fear, Hatred, and Deception. He calls each of these chapters, each of these a disease: the disease of fear, the disease of hatred, the disease of deception. And this last chapter is entitled Love, which explores how love, as understood and lived out by Jesus, is the antidote to fear, hatred, and deception. I shouldn't say the antidote, an antidote. And it's also an antidote to those triple A's, the experience of being afraid, angry, and anxious. And Thurman charges us to ask ourselves, when does fear creep in and take a hold such that we hold back a part of ourselves? When have we demonized others and allowed hatred to cover over a piece of our heart and soul so that we contribute to the divisions among us? And most importantly, and most difficult to notice, where has deception grown in us? Where have we sought to deceive another to the point that we begin to deceive our own selves? Fear, hatred, and deception. Thurman calls these the hounds of hell that beckon us to close our hearts, to close them from others, from the spirit of life, from our own selves, and to cultivate love in our lives by engaging spiritual practice so that we can hear the whisper of our heart in the silence, so that we can recognize the call of the genuine. And the voice of the genuine, when we hear it, I agree with Thurman, shines a light on and gets through all the fear, all the hatred, all the deception. The voice of the genuine reaches us through love and calls us forward. But often the genuine flows through us without us being fully aware. But each and every day, we're capable of turning inward and listening for that genuine where love is beckoning us. I love what Otis Moss III says about Thurman. Moss is the lead pastor at Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, where Jeremiah Wright pastored and the Obamas attended for many years. When Moss was interviewed by Krista Tippett for her radio show On Being, Moss used a metaphor from Star Wars. He said, "America likes to think of itself as the Jedis, but too often doesn't recognize it's the Empire. But if you want to be a Jedi, you've got to find your Yoda." And for Moss, Howard Thurman is our Yoda. I love how Moss says, when you begin to nurture spirit, the spirit, as Thurman speaks of, social constructions fall to the wayside, though they inform. But of all the things that we use as markers begin to fall away, and we begin to discern our own inward sea. Once we discover our inward sea, Thurman says, there's an island. In the inward sea, there's an island that everyone has in their spirit, and that on that island is an altar. And next to that altar is an angel with a flaming sword. And in order to put what is most important on the altar, you first have to find the sea. You've got to get to the island, and you've got to get past the angel so that you can find what is truly genuine in you. And once you find that, you come truly alive. You discover what you have been purposed for. And you begin the work outward. So you work inward to work outward. And Moss, of course, lifts up the African spirituals are what gives richness to the African American Christian tradition and its ability to respond to deep pain and tragedy. And this, my friends, is a time to lament. What is happening in our nation is horrible. The rhetoric of fear and hatred that was intolerable 9 years ago is now ramped up so much more that it feels like the wider culture is normalizing more and more of it. And our culture largely seeks to avoid the pain of tragedy. But the voice of the genuine demands it. We have to grieve. As Moss says, America has difficulty with lament because we romanticize history. And we're so drunk on Confederate wine and don't even realize it that when you use lament in some communities and for some ears, they hear it as hate. Yes, many forms of Christianity have been infiltrated with fear, hatred, and deception. But Jesus taught that those grounded in love need not live under their dominion. Just as the skin horse said, real isn't how you're made, it's a thing that happens to you. It happens to you as you're real about what's going on and finding ways to connect with others. Honestly, openly. This happens when you can hear the sound of the genuine. And working inwardly so that you can work outwardly. It's not easy to be real. It hurts. We start getting more shabby. And we can know tremendous joy and come awake and vital. And may this be a congregation where we create spaces that invite each other to do just that. Because I believe this is what we need to do when we find ourselves frightened. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen.
Visit us at uusg.org.